Glitches are used to skip parts of games or complete sections of games differently. Typically, this is done to lower the time of a speedrun. Barrier Skip in the Wind Waker HD lets you access the end of the game during the first visit to Hyrule. Aurora's Wind Wrong Warp in Ocarina of Time 3D brings you straight to the credits by having a Blue Warp and a Aurora's Wind placed in Goron City overlap each other. Breath of the Wild has no shortage of glitches and skips. Runners clip out of the Shrine of Resurrection within the first minute of the run to skip watching the opening cutscene. They clip through all the shrines on the Great Plateau to skip activating the tower, and shoot an arrow to skip fighting Windblight. All these skips are used to reduce the time of a speedrun. Here we will cover something that isn't used to lower time, but a barrier to allowing a challenge run to be possible. This is the story of attempting to complete the 2 Ruta terminals without using runes. If you're unaware, the 5 runes received on the Great Plateau are the items used to solve puzzles throughout the game. The any % category of this game can be beaten without any rune uses, but it barely shows any of the game. This led to questions of what else can be beaten runeless. All Dungeons was the first thing to be tested, and surprisingly, this was almost completely possible. So many things were thought to have no other option but to use runes, and the majority of those were solved. It turns out there was only 2 necessary rune uses, the metal cog and the spinning cog in Ruta. The metal cog requires the use of magnesis to spin the cog, which lifts the terminal out of the water. The spinning cog requires cryonis to block the water source, which lowers the water, making the terminal accessible. There were many theoretical solutions for these cogs. Both cogs have a terminal that needs to be activated in order to access the main unit and defeat Waterblight. The other 3 terminals can be activated, but these 2 just can't without runes. Currently, there's no way of activating the main unit without all 5 terminals being activated. The first solution idea sprouted from an existing glitch, the Shrine Coordinate Warp, or SCW. If you activate the elevator of a shrine and leave the load radius of the elevator, it will unload. But if you go into another elevator's radius before the initial elevator unloads, you will be put into the second shrine, not the first. It's used in speedruns to go from Ritahi at the bottom of the Dueling Peaks to Shivanir at the top, from Talanaegi to Laknaroki to skip doing the Kakariko side quest and saving the village from Iiga, and from Katakar to Rakazunzo to skip the entire Vanabor section in the Sansu race. Here, we don't want to access an inaccessible shrine, but instead an inaccessible terminal. Sometimes when runners activate the Nabor's terminal in the Camelhead, they'll activate the cutscene and fall out, which delays the activation of the cutscene until they land. No one ever went closer to another terminal, so we didn't know if it would activate a different terminal. The theory was that if we activated one terminal and went near another terminal before the cutscene played, it would activate the closest terminal rather than the initial one, just like in SCW. So, this was tested in the same Divine Beast. The terminal at the top of the large room was activated, and Link glided on top of the terminal in a box. Link was mere inches from the second terminal and many meters from the first terminal. Unfortunately, when the cutscene of activating the terminal played, the first terminal was activated and the second terminal was untouched. It turns out when you activate a terminal, it plays the specific cutscene at the terminal you pressed A on. There's no radius to check for which terminal cutscene should play. The theoretical terminal coordinate warp is sadly out of the picture. The next thing that was tested was collision overload. When you pull out a multi-shot bow with shock arrows equipped, drop it, equip another, and do that a few more times, the menu will become overloaded. This desyncs the link in the menu from the link in the world. For example, if you had the Master Sword equipped, did the menu overload, and equipped a torch, the Master Sword will be shown in the menu, but the torch is equipped. This can be used to duplicate swords, bows, shields, and items. Collision overload is the extreme version of menu overload. If you use menu overload to duplicate hundreds of elemental swords, the game will become so overloaded that some collision unloads. Link can't take any damage from enemies in this state. Cryonis blocks can angle in cool ways. For some reason, when Link jumps, he dives into the floor. Clearly, collision overload messes with the game heavily. Well, another thing that's unloaded is water collision. This allows for Link to walk around freely in water without swimming. Hypothetically, if we were to do this in Ruta, it would allow us to sink in the water and activate the 2 terminals. It can't be used to open chests underwater in the overworld, but we still wanted to try it anyways. So we did, and of course there was no activation prompt. Both terminals could be stood in front of now, but they just could not be activated. Very recently, a glitch was found called the submaling glitch that lets Link go underwater without swimming. Even though collision overload did the same thing, it was still worth testing. By obtaining the Moonjung glitch and starting the Birdman minigame, it messes with the game determining whether Link should be swimming or standing. While in this state, if you drain all of Link's stamina and force him under a cryo block, he can go underwater. The obvious issue with this is that it uses the Cryonis rune. The hope was that it didn't need to be Cryonis that sank Link. We thought that a chest could also be used to push Link underwater. Luckily enough, there happens to be a chest inside Ruta. It's just metal and inside water. To bypass using magnesis for it, you would need to do collision overload to get in the water. Once underwater, you can use octoballoons to float it out of the water. Using a coral leaf or bomb arrows, we would need to precisely maneuver the chest to both terminals to perform the submaling glitch. This would be beyond difficult to perform or downright impossible to do without task tools. Thankfully, when you're in this glitch state, you can't talk to NPCs or warp because the game thinks you're in a minigame. Therefore, it's impossible to talk to Sidon or warp to Ruta. It's unknown if this glitch would actually work because there's no way of testing it in Ruta. Void storage was tested as well. By obtaining the apparatus glitch in an apparatus shrine, Link won't void out. By standing anywhere in that apparatus shrine, going into the void without landing anywhere else or opening any menus, those coordinates can be applied to a different shrine by loading a save in that shrine. This is used in Isles to completely skip puzzles and shrines and go right to examining the monk. Void storage also works in Divine Beasts. This means we could be put in any part of Ruta, like in front of the two terminals. At first glance, this would seem dumb because both terminals are submerged underwater so you can't activate them. But when you perform void storage, Link does an animation of picking himself up off the ground. The hope was that while Link picks himself up, there would be a small window where you could activate the terminal. The only problem is there's nowhere to void storage from. The coordinates needed are barely out of reach. There's no way to tell if this would really work since we can't have Link spawn in front of the terminals. It seems like everything has been tried and nothing has worked. The terminals were thought to be the only necessary rune uses. Not one of these glitches seemed to work, and that was the issue. Glitches were only tested by themselves, not combined. The moon jump glitch makes the game think Link is always grounded, and collision overload removes the swimming property of water. It was theorized that the reason we couldn't activate the terminals even when underwater was because the game didn't think Link was grounded. Earlier I mentioned that with just collision overload, it wasn't possible to open chests underwater. When this combined strat was tested, we were able to open a metal chest underwater. If we could open this, surely we can activate the two terminals. And of course, when we got to the terminal, the A prompt was still nowhere to be found. Unfortunately, the game not only checks for Link being grounded, but also checks if the terminals are still submerged underwater. Even though the game knows Link is standing on ground, unless we are able to get rid of water, this will never be possible. And so, we are exactly where we started. Two terminals unable to be activated without using runes. Our only hopes are for a way to completely remove the water, or to be able to activate the main unit without all 5 terminals activated. Maybe someday that will happen, but for now we are forced to use a depressing 2 runes. Thank you for watching. See ya.